Hey guys, welcome to the tutorial. In this one we're looking at cross-cultural politeness strategies and avoiding miscommunication as part of the context of cross-cultural leadership. Alright, so obviously politeness matters. Politeness can become trickier when we are dealing with more than one culture. And because what's polite in one culture may sound rude or vague in another. Different societies have unique expectations in how requests and statements should be phrased to show respect. So for example, some countries prefer direct communication that uses clear, explicit language. Polite and neutral styles soften commands with phrases like please, and indirect styles imply requests subtly, often to maintain harmony. So if you're coming in contact with direct communication culture for the first time, it can be very sort of abrasive or aggressive. Whereas if you're coming in contact with indirect style for the first time, it might not be clear what it is you're supposed to do or what the instruction was. So this is where there can be breakdowns in communication and a bit of frustration. So examples of different levels would be, you need to send this today. Like you need to send this report today, for example. Would be the most direct. Polite or neutral would be, could you send this today, please? And indirect would be, it would be great if we could have it today. So they're all intended to mean the same thing. Let's say the literal meaning is the same, but the semantic meanings are... Sorry, better said. The literal meanings are different, but the semantic meanings are the same. The intention is the same. There's something that you should complete. But depending on the culture that you are in, that can be expressed in different ways. So to make some other contrasts, in a direct style, you say simply, this plan won't work. Indirect would be, I'm not sure this plan will work as intended. Neutral would be, there may be some challenges with this plan. So we've got this hedging language. And I've spoken before in this course about how hedging language is useful. But you don't want it to get to the point where the intention or the message isn't fully understood. So the direct style we would associate with countries such as USA, Germany, Netherlands. It's clear and it's blunt. And if you're used to it, it's fine. But if you're not used to it, it can be quite abrasive. Indirect would be more like Japan. Yeah, arguably United Kingdom, South Korea. Polite, but maybe not entirely clear. So we want to go neutral. We want to go in the middle. You don't want to be so direct that you might cause offense or come across as unnecessarily aggressive. But on the other hand, you don't want your instruction or direction to be so vague that the person doesn't actually know what it is that you meant. So yeah, coming back to this topic hedging that we've seen a few times, we can use phrases like, it seems that, or perhaps we could, to make statements less direct and soften the impact, creating a more tentative tone. But obviously, you still want the message to be clear. That's the balance you have to find. Polite modal verbs, you guys are probably aware of these. So saying, could you instead of can you, would you mind? These are used to frame instructions effectively, but they're sort of presented as questions. Like, could you get that report to me by 3 p.m? Or would you mind getting that report to me by 3 p.m? These hypothetical conditional structures are very useful, but you have to make sure that the person's not just going to say no, or yes, I would mind finishing that report by 3. So again, you have to be aware of what the prevailing culture is. Appreciation and empathy never goes wrong in any circumstance. I don't know any environment where I appreciate your help would not be well received, or I understand your position not be considered appropriate. What we call buffering disagreement, which is, again, this depends on the culture you're in. That's an interesting point, though I see it slightly differently, which is a very polite way to say, you know what, I disagree, but thanks for coming, sort of thing. You've thought about it and that's good, but you're not quite right. So it's about finding the balance, right? Hedging to be polite, but not hedging or buffering or filling your instructions or directions full of hypothetical language to the point where the other person doesn't actually know what you're asking, or they think they have the opportunity to say, no, I don't want to do that. We think about triggers cross-cultural communication. So as I mentioned before, over-directness can be a problem. Finish that report by 4 p.m. It's clear, it's efficient, it's unambiguous, but it can be a bit rude in certain cultures. On the other hand, over-politeness can be counterproductive. If it's not too much trouble, maybe could you finish that report by 4 p.m? So again, it may get to the point where I'm not actually sure if I need to finish this report by 4 p.m. or not. It sounds indecisive, doesn't sound very authoritative, so you can go too much in the other direction. You also have to be very careful with things like idioms and slang, and to a lesser extent jargon, because jargon actually tends to be quite international. But certainly slang you would tend not to use in business anyway. And even idioms that are really common in English for native speakers might be very challenging for non-native speakers. Like if I say, let's touch base later, which means let's meet together later, let's talk later and discuss the progress that has been made. But you need to know the phrasal verb, or the idiomatic phrasal verb, touch base, in order to understand that instruction. Humor as well. So, for example, that's a killer idea. Now, as a native speaker of English, that means that's a really, really good idea. But if English is not your first language, then, logically you might think, it's a terrible idea. This is an idea that's going to kill the company, right? So killer, bizarrely, can be used as a positive adjective in English, particularly in North America. But it's counterintuitive. So again, you have to be aware of your audience if it's a non-native speaking English audience. Functional language for diplomacy never goes wrong, I don't think, in any circumstance. Making requests. If you're asking a favor, if you're making a genuine request, if it's a real question, certainly. Would it be possible to, could you please, well, we've got to make the distinction between a request and a command or an order or an instruction. But for making requests, absolutely, we use this type of polite language all the time. Feedback as well. Feedback, as we spoke about earlier in the course, is a potentially risky area of interaction because being too direct might be considered offensive or counterproductive. So use language like, one area we might improve is, or have you considered? Disagreeing politely, very important as well. That's a valid point, but, or I see it differently. And managing mistakes, again, as we mentioned earlier in the course. Try to take the focus off the individual and put the focus on the action or the corrective action that we want to see. Let's see how we can fix this together. Another thing we're thinking about is the cultural perception of silence and tone. Because in some cultures, silence is a sign of thoughtfulness and respect. For example, in Japan and Finland, silence is valued as a moment to reflect and carefully consider responses. So if you've explained something to someone, period of silence after that explanation would be considered, okay, this person is absorbing the information, and then maybe consider if they have any questions about it. Other cultures, such as, for example, the United States and Brazil, silence can be interpreted as disagreement, disinterest, disengagement, lack of understanding, and that can potentially cause misunderstandings or issues. So silence is seen in different ways in different places. You don't just have to think about when you talk and what you say. You also have to think about when you don't talk. Tone also plays a role. A flat tone might be perceived as boredom or lack of engagement, while excessive enthusiasm could come across as unprofessional. And again, this can be where, if you're not communicating in your first language, this is where you might be a little bit limited in your ability, because it tends to be, you focus more on the message and the vocabulary and the grammar that you're using, and things like tone and intonation might get a little bit abandoned. So the overall tip is to match your tone to the setting. Be calm, clear, professional, know the right terminology, be polite, be respectful, be culturally aware. If you do that, you're not going to go far wrong. So how do we avoid miscommunication? Keep English clear and literal, avoiding slang, idioms, and unnecessary jargon to ensure understanding. Sometimes jargon is necessary, especially if it's sort of within the same company or within the same industry or discipline. Adapt your tone to the cultural context, not just your choice of words. Use softeners such as hedging, modal verbs, and expressions of sympathy to soften statements, but not to the point where the message becomes unclear, or to the point where the other person doesn't understand whether they actually have to do something or not. Listen actively. We spoke about active listening earlier in the course, and ask clarifying questions to confirm understanding. For example, just to confirm, did you mean by and you repeat or you paraphrase what they said in order to gain, to be confident that you've understood their intention. So summing up, key politeness insights. Politeness is culturally specific, though some things I would say are more or less universal, and what is considered polite in one culture may not be in another. Clear, empathetic English helps minimize misunderstandings across cultures. Tone and leadership. Adjusting your tone appropriately in communication is a vital skill for effective global leadership, ensuring messages are received as intended without causing confusion. Something you guys can try and think about is to review a short English business email or meeting transcript. Identify where politeness is expressed, where tone might cause confusion, and try and rewrite one or two sentences to be more globally polite. So maybe look at something you guys will have internally, or maybe you can Google something and find it. I'll include tasks similar to this in the downloadable content. So you're going to look at some written business English and try and see, okay, pros and cons. What's polite, what's respectful, what could be improved, what might cause confusion. It's a very worthwhile task to undertake. Thank you very much, guys. I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye.